550 millimeters here in Berlin on average a year. So I think what comes clear, and that's the point that I want to make, very often what we call extreme events nowadays are even extreme compared to our climate change projections that we have. So they have very often the multitude of, for instance, precipitation than what we have seen, what we have planned for in the cities. But we want to go into a dystrophic vision here today. Next slide, please. What we want to talk about is this vision. We want to talk with you about smart cities, about the role that nature-based solutions can play to improve the ecology of cities, to improve daily lives of citizens. So we really want to share cutting-edge research and international case studies. We want to go with you in a dialogue between academia, practice, and policymakers, and planning, of course. We want to highlight socioeconomic, ecological, and technical dimensions of nature-based solutions in cities. And yeah, I think we want to discuss with you strategies to scale up nature-based implementation so that we have a more brighter future, let's say, which is more comparable to what you see here in the picture. Next slide, please. So who are we? Why is this conference here today with you? I mean, we present the NICHES project, which is a Biodiversity Plus project, and we are scientists from several countries in Europe. We had case studies, main case studies in Rotterdam, Barcelona, and Boston, but also we looked into Berlin and Sheffield. And the most interesting feature of our research is about how can nature-based solutions mitigate and treat combined sewer overflows and how to reduce the negative impacts associated with it. So we not only looked into technical issues and the ecologies, but also looked into social and economic values of reduced impact. We tried to determine city-specific vulnerabilities. We developed with stakeholders transition pathways. And I remember a great workshop that we had a couple of months ago here in Berlin. And I think most of, or some of you are have been there and remember it also as a very interesting workshop. Yeah, and of course, we also want to give decision support to urban planners, to policymakers. And that's actually our final conference here today. And we thought it's more interesting not to just present our own results. We really wanted to reach out to our network of other researchers and invited them over. So that's why we can present to you a very nice package if you want to get an update on nature-based solutions in cities. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just very briefly what you can expect today. We have two sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session, which is separated by 1 hour lunch break. And in the morning session, which you can already see here, the topic integrating, we will be looking at hydrological and ecological impacts of nature-based solutions. We have a keynote speaker, and afterwards some presentations, which will be followed up then by we have a Q&A session with participant discussion, but we also will have a panel where we invite speakers, but also some external scientists to share their visions with us. Then in the afternoon session, which is session 2 on socioeconomic and political dimension of nature-based solutions, we will have actually the same setting. We will have a keynote speaker, some talks from scientists, and then a panel discussion. And afterwards, we close it. For us, it's very important that we go into very intense interactions with you. So please use those Q&A functions that I have highlighted before, so that we can collect your questions and ask the panelists and the speakers these questions that you have. So that is as far as I want to introduce today's program. Next slide, please. So now we already, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first keynote speaker. It's Katie V. Rico, and she's a biologist and environmental scientist and a senior research scientist from Syke, which is the Finnish Environment Institute. Her focus in her research is on urban biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem services, especially with a focus on green areas and small water bodies. And she's involved in a lot of European and international projects, like, for instance, BNatur, BioStep, and Green Search. Please give a warm virtual welcome to Katie. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ute. Just checking, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for, first of all, for inviting me to here to present our BNatur project, as we are sister project for NICHES, funded by the same program, Water GPI and Biodiversa. So today I will give you a short overview of some results of our project, and as it's called, bringing nature back, biodiversity-friendly, nature-based solution in cities. Next slide, please. We have 6 partners from 5 cities, so 2 partners from Berlin, where you are situated, Ute, so Humboldt and IGP Berlin. And then Finnish Environment Institute is leading the project. And then we have 3 universities from Antwerp, Poznan, and Lisbon. Next slide, please. And special thanks to our marvelous, excellent team. I'm listing here some people, but there's a lot of many not named here. But special thanks especially to Vladimira, Christoph, and Maria, who are actually responsible of content of this presentation. Next slide, please. When we started to prepare our proposal, as you all know, if you have made few proposals, that you should kind of give an overview of potential scientific and policy impact of your project. So I actually pointed here the ones that I can proudly say that we have successfully achieved in BNatur. So I think we, as you see soon, that we have provided some new scientific evidence of the role of biodiversity in aquatic nature-based solutions. We have also tested the socio-ecological technical framing, especially how to use it in implementing empirical research and to make some methodological design. We will publish a handbook during this year, focusing on how to monitor different taxonomic groups in small-scale urban water bodies, because we realized that it is actually missing, and maybe some good guidelines are needed to support others to do similar kind of work. And all the time during the project, we have participated with our local practitioners, designers, planners, other stakeholders. And through those consultations and discussions, we have already provided recommendations how to support biodiversity when designing or building aquatic nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. I'm not going to detail what we mean by socio-ecological technical framing, but just emphasize here that during our project, we made a lot of research related on policy and planning aspects of aquatic nature-based solutions. We have used very many different analytical tools to better understand the urban environment that has an impact to the biodiversity in aquatic nature-based solutions. But today, can you click once again? We have I will focus mainly on results of ecological aspects, asking what are the main drivers and interlinkages between environmental factors and biodiversity, and what kind of species richness we can find in different cities and in Europe in aquatic nature-based solutions. Then please, next slide. Perhaps Ute mentioned what is nature-based solutions. I think we all have some kind of images, what we mean by them. EUCN, United Nations, European Commission have all their own definitions, but in our Binatur project, we considered water-related or aquatic nature-based solutions as solutions that bring some kind of support for urban-related societal challenges, especially for runoff water flooding problems, but also bringing some benefits for residents, and of course then supporting biodiversity. Most likely these habitats are facing extreme conditions related to water quality, high temperatures, changes in water levels, and also how they are managed can have a very negative impact to their functions and biodiversity. And also people is a main disturbance in urban regions, as we all understand that. Next slide. It was actually quite challenging to really try to decide what kind of aquatic nature-based solutions we select to our studies in 5 cities that differ greatly in geographical conditions and weather, and also from policy concept and other. So we finally decided to have a stream and pond type of aquatic nature-based solutions. We allowed to have changes in water availability during the year, and also we aim to select sites where there are less modified and strongly modified sites. But to some extent, at least we needed them to have stabilized vegetations, and also some variation between the size of aquatic nature-based solutions. And for each cities, we finally selected 12 different sites, and also 2 sampling sites from each of these research sites. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of our sites. As you can see, they are rather small scale. So we had 6 ponds and 6 streams in each 5 cities. And from those sites, we collected or sampled vegetation, microinvertebrates. We did habitat quality monitoring. We collected water sample to get an overview of water quality. We analyzed also isotopes and collected samples for environmental DNA analysis. Next slide, please. And to set up just to give an overview of methodological design on setting up the sample site, so that we have a 10-meter quadrat to monitor biodiversity, taxonomic biodiversity for less modified and modified sites. Next slide, please. And we used integrated multi-tracer approach, basically meaning that we collected samples for isotope analysis and environmental analysis. And for me, for example, the water isotopes, as it has been quite long and established made along Europe and especially in Berlin, for me it was a new kind of method, and it was very exciting to learn more about that method as it can resolve what is the origin of water, how much there's a groundwater influence or rainwater influence, or even if there's some tap water in your nature-based solutions. It also tells a water age, the circulation of age in the site, and also it helps us to understand better hydrochemistry of the sites. And finally, environmental DNA, nowadays very much used. It can relieve very different taxonomic groups that tells you about the water quality or overall diversity of the site. Next slide, please. Okay, then aiming to some results and how we did that. So we have now published a few papers, especially focusing on microphyte diversity. And we found it is crucial to understand whether these aquatic nature-based solutions can support microphyte diversity. Vegetation, of course, is a key component in these nature-based solutions, as they have an important role of controlling flooding or picking up the nutrient or other pollutants. They can be a very good indicators for the quality of aquatic environment. And therefore, we specified to focus on this taxonomic group, and we especially looked at species richness, abundancy, and different ecological characteristics of microphytes. And next slide, I'll show you first results on. So overall, we found 103 different microphyte species and significant differences between cities. Here in Finland, where I'm situated, the species diversity was highest and lowest in Berlin. And also we found differences about the environmental characteristics of species between cities. Overall, it can be said that the sites were very species rich, and it's kind of support the idea that bringing new type of aquatic nature-based solutions or restoring degraded urban small water bodies can support the diversity of microphyte in cities. Then next slide, please. We also studied the diversity of macroinvertebrates, as they have been also used as an indicator of habitat quality. We use standardized method using in Water Framework Directive, and we considered especially 5 key drivers for those communities of microinvertebrates, which were climate, vegetation, water, habitat quality, and potential other variables. And next slide shows results of what kind of species we found. If we have some people familiar with this group of animals, but maybe we continue another, giving an overview of our result. Next slide, please. So if we look at the European level, we could see that local climate conditions explained a lot about the variation. And of course, whether it was stream or pond type of aquatic nature-based solution. Also, bottom material had an important role of explaining the composition of species. Vegetation was also how much there are vegetation around the aquatic nature-based solutions were also very important driver. And especially if you go to the next slide, we could see these different explanations in different cities. For example, here in Finland, the vegetation explained a lot. While, for example, in Belgium, we couldn't find really the clear drivers of microinvertebrates diversity. And we could see that there's a variation among cities or countries about the species compositions and which main drivers were explaining the diversity. Next slide, please. Then just to summing up, as I showed you shortly, there are some evidence now that aqua nature-based solutions can support urban biodiversity. But of course, this is only one very, very limited study, and it still needs to be more detailed analysis on that. And we have to better understand what kind of species composition there are and what kind of species or taxonomic diversity are also valued by the urban designers and those who are responsible of managing these sites. Sometimes species richness is not really considered as valuable if it's in conflict, for example, the primary goal of regulating water flooding. But still, I think positively that we can also support biodiversity when designing and managing aquatic nature-based solution in cities. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. This was a very enlightening speech on aquatic NBS. And please, for those of you, if you have questions, please remember we have the Q&A function in Teams. You still have afterwards, like in half an hour, about half an hour, the opportunity to ask your questions. So please put those questions that you have to Katie also or to the other speakers in the Q&A function. We move on with the topic that was already mentioned by Katie, which is understanding socio-ecological technical systems. This was a buzzword that was already used, and it's a pleasure for me now to introduce you to Pablo Herreros. He's a PhD candidate at the BAS Climate Center and also the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, and he has a background in environmental engineering and environmental management, and he will introduce us to this very interesting concept that we will pick up upon very often today. Pablo,
thank you all.
Thank
you so much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about these sets or social, ecological, technological systems, about which I think the point of the next just 10 minutes that I'm gonna share with you, I think that the best thing we can do is just try. I'm gonna give a broad overview about what they are and how they have been used and operationalized so far. And I encourage you to keep these points a little bit in mind throughout the rest of the day, to think either how present are we, is this framework or this lens throughout our work, but also because this is a rather novel way of tackling integrated assessments and research, we can also think together about how it could be also further developed. Perhaps I'm going to take advantage of introducing my background a little bit and start with a story about how 7 or 8 years ago, when I was freshly out of my master's and I was working on my first research project, I was working on environmental justice of urban ecosystem services. Which basically meant thinking, is the people that need street trees the most benefiting from them the most? So basically, we were looking, for example, at climate impacts like extreme heat or urban heat islands. And we were thinking, okay, where is it hotter? Where is there more people? And where are the trees cooling down the environment the most? Do those things match, right? And I remember presenting this work and writing a manuscript about it, and always in the back of my head thinking, feeling kind of weird about the fact that we were giving the same value, we were assessing the same way a tree that is right in front of a single family house with the same value as a tree that was maybe in front of the Empire State Building. We're also not thinking about whether people across the city of New York had equal access to air conditioning. And that was me with a background in forestry engineering, coming into extremely complex environments, which are cities, and that for the last maybe 10 to 20 years have been approached sometimes as social ecological systems, which is already a quite powerful lens, but that also can go beyond. In the same way that other folks have approached urban systems as social technological systems, also facing perhaps different yet similar limitations in their work. So with that, without further ado, we can go to the next slide and contextualize urban systems as social, ecological, technological systems, in which we try to marry social technological scholarship and social ecological to frame and advocate for a more integrated definition of cities. This is just a lens, it's a framework of how we can examine, how we can plan, how we can manage, and how we can position our work towards to better understand what are we looking at, what should we be looking at. Next slides, please. So for those, because already sets are integrating so much, perhaps for some of us it might be more clear what a social domain or an ecological domain has within, right? So these are just for two example publications that came out at the conception of the framework that exemplify what is inside of each of these social, ecological, and technological domains, as we call them. For example, well, we can go on. Yeah, we can go on because in the same way that we think about what is the social domain, what is in the ecological domain, and what is in the technological domain, something that is of extreme importance is to always think that we're also accounting for the interactions, right? In the same way that social ecological systems are one single system in which two domains are interacting, and in that interaction is where when something that is a synergy that is more than the sum of the social and the ecological parts comes up, with sets is sort of the same way, and it is as important to think about those couplings or interactions across domains as it is to think about the components within each domain, to ensure that, for example, in this context, climate adaptation is sustainable, transformative, and leads to what some folks have defined as a good or a better Anthropocene, in which the undesired outcomes, for example, are not are minimized. As an example of this, we could think, for example, about climate adaptation policies that focus only on one domain. So, for example, ecological remediation, or improving or increasing green spaces, without thinking about the social and the infrastructural consequences that there might be, leading, for example, to green gentrification. Next slide. So I was trying to give earlier like an example of people like myself with a forestry background, and there's also folks from the social technological world who have also been thinking about transforming urban systems as into sets from the infrastructure perspective, and that has been mainly focused on thinking beyond, thinking about infrastructure beyond something that focuses on control, but instead something that embraces the entanglement of those domains. So needing to recognize uncertainty, needing to recognize that S, E, and T are not separate, isolated subsystems, but rather part of a single thing. Another kind of like falsification of approaches that have been traditionally more strict and more discrete. So this is, for example, a really interesting publication that I recommend every time that I'm talking about sets to people that are new about it. We go to the next slide. If I was to do that research project again about how people have access to the benefits of green spaces in a city, I I would start with this very novel proposition about what we see in this figure is just hypothetical explorations about different urban ecosystem services and how they might be influenced by social, ecological, or technological factors that mediate in their supply, in their realization, and their production. So, for example, here in NICHES, we've been focusing a lot around stormwater absorption, and coming from a social ecological perspective, we might have been looking at, as I was saying earlier, where is there more people? What are the land uses? What is the cover of the ground that maybe creates more or less runoff? But there are huge infrastructural components that might have been overlooked. For example, what lies underground? Is it possible to install a nature-based solution everywhere, or is it subject to there being a parking lot or pipes underneath? Next slide, please. And there are other more hands-on applications of social, ecological, technological systems thinking. For example, in this case, in which a group of researchers thought, okay, we are very well aware of what social vulnerability is, but what is ecological and technological vulnerability? How we can look at vulnerability in cities across these different domains. So what they did was defining sets of exposure, adaptive capacity, and sensitivity indicators, not only for the social domain, but also the ecological and technological domain, to illustrate that different parts of a given city could be flagged as more vulnerable to either, like based on either of those domains in different parts. So if you think of where is my city more vulnerable in terms of infrastructure being impacted by a flooding, you might see different parts of the city highlighted than if you thought, where is the people more vulnerable? And that needs to be more elevated and more thought of explicitly. Next slide, please. Of course, as I'm saying, none of us probably is able to tackle social, ecological, technological systems alone, because if it's already hard to sit at the intersection of two domains, imagine sitting in the intersection of those three. We're not sociologists and engineers and ecologists at the same time. So it's a very big challenge to approach sets that require a lot of interdisciplinarity and integrated knowledge to gain as much understanding as possible from as many perspectives as possible on the problem that we're trying to tackle. And next slide. And this is the last one. This is an example of how that has been attempted to really embrace that interdisciplinarity. And what we're looking at here is sort of like a causal loop diagram, very simplified, of the social, ecological, and technological factors that influence the impacts of extreme precipitation in a city, which in this case was Arizona. But also what we're looking at is the result of interviewing many different stakeholders from governance and from management knowledge landscapes. And their knowledge has been integrated into this sort of like meta model of how a social, ecological, technological system works. I will say, though, just to bring a little bit of my own perspective here, that what we see in this diagram is actually ecological and technological components interacting, and then social impacts popping out in those like spiky orange little signs. And if we wanted to even further elevate this, we would think about how those social impacts that are there feed back into the ecological and the infrastructural factors that are already being represented here. Am I right? So anyway, we can go to the next slide. There's a QR code there if you're interested in accessing the references that I have provided. But I think that there was already a lot of information here, but ultimately, this is just a very broad example of where are we coming from, why sets are so important, interesting, or applicable, and just a few examples of how they have been operationalized at the same time as NICHES was taking off. So with that in mind, the rest of the day, I hope that you can go back to this and see our work reflecting these inspirations, and also think about what would be the next steps in this kind of applications. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Pablo. You really brought us the concept of sets closer and made it more tangible, hopefully for most of us. And I think it's needless to say that we really need to work on mainstreaming the sets concept, especially to urban and landscape planners, but also to think about how those aspects can be mainstreamed in governance settings in public administration in order to really make a difference. Thank you very much. We come directly to the next presentation, which will be also already the first presentation with outputs from the NICHES project. I'm very delighted to announce now Sven to Links. He works for NEO at the Department of Aquatic Ecology in the Netherlands Institute for Ecology, and he will give a talk on co-designing ecosystem service provisioning in hydrologic aquatic models. Sven, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ulf. I'm afraid that the title is for that you just listed is for my colleague Lisette, who will be after. So I'll be talking about ecological resilience of urban catchments to combined sewage overflows, specifically focusing on Rotterdam. I am Sven Teurlings. I work at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology. Let me see. And we can go to the next slide. So this is the team that I've worked with the past years on this topic, and we can go to the next one. And just to give a bit of background into ecological and engineering resilience, one of the things we tend to see when we focus more on the engineering side is that essentially we have quite a single state system. So we design something to do something, and we can design it really well and have a really high resilience to whatever happens, or we can design it maybe in a less sustainable way, and then it has pretty low resilience. In contrast, if we look at ecosystems, they tend to be very often multiple state. So that means that an ecosystem doesn't just do really well, illustrated here by that low valley. So it's really hard to push that ball into the others into a different system, but actually it can go into a different system, and then that can lead to sometimes quite positive or sometimes quite dramatic consequences. Next slide, please. One of the examples of this is what happens when we when we have sewage overflows and a lot of nutrients go into the water. Well, that essentially can have impacts on that water quality, both for people who like swimming in that water, for instance, but also for nature. Next. First off, what we see is that input of nutrients can actually cause a very turbid situation. Now, the good news in ecology is there's actually an alternative stable state, namely a clear state. Next slide. Which is shown in a situation with transparent water covered by aquatic macrophytes. So both of these states can coexist. They can exist at the same time, given a certain amount of nutrients coming in, and they depend a lot on where you start from. That is very nicely illustrated in the next slide, where we see along an axis of nutrient loading as we start from the left hand. If we go up and up and up, plants start growing. We're in a nice clear situation. The water is not turbid, and at some point there's a transition point. So we go into a turbid situation. That turbid situation is generally seen as undesirable by water management. It's also not the the situation we would like for our ecosystem services, because we might get algal blooms that can smell or be toxic. Now, if we're in that turbid situation all the way at the right end and we have to go back, we follow the top line. So it takes a lot more effort to go back than it did to go forward. So these critical transition points, the red lines, are at a different position. These alternative stable states in ecosystems are quite well described for lakes, but also for ditches. And this means that we have two stable states. So our resilience is both in staying in a turbid situation, but also in staying in a clear situation, which means that it really depends where we start off from. And once we're in that hysteretic zone, a small push could lead to a dramatic shift in that ecosystem state. Next slide, please. Now, these different ecosystem states exist because we have something called positive feedback loops, which means that if we have vegetation, that vegetation is impacted by it's able to capture nutrients, meaning that if we capture nutrients, we get less algal growth, because algae also need nutrients to grow, which in turn leads to less turbidity and then leads to less vegetation. Now, if we click 4 times, we should see that pop up. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Go on. Yeah. Thanks. So this is essentially one of these positive feedback loops that I mentioned, and they also work in the inverse way, right? So if we have vegetation going down, we get more nutrients available for the algae, we get more turbidity, which in turn means less light for the plants, which means less plants, more nutrients, more algae, etc. All right, these positive feedback loops exist. There are more of these than just vegetation and turbidity, but this is the easy one to explain. Let's go on to the next slide. Something we see in the urban context is that nutrients are coming from many different sources, but a very dominant source is sewage. There are, of course, many different other sources, such as runoff, people throwing things into the water, people having dogs shit very near to the water, feeding birds, you name it. So it's quite diverse, but that sewage overflow is a very important source of nutrients. And it's also a source that we could potentially manage through nature-based solutions by creating more sponge capacity in our cities. Next slide. So these combined sewage overflows essentially lead to an impact on water quality for people. They do that, for instance, by impacting the ecosystem services that our water is able to provide. You see that here in the bottom with C, there's this big swimming ban because the CSO happened. At the same time, they also therefore are impacting the ecological water quality. And those two might be intrinsically linked in some cases, but not for all ecosystem services do we need everything we need for good ecological water quality. So it's worthwhile to assess the two separately. Next slide, please. Now, the real risk with such a CSO is that the extreme precipitation actually causes a state shift from potentially a good state, dominated by plants, clear, to a bad state, dominated by algae or duckweed. And it's quite hard when we get into that bad state to roll the ball back up the hill. So there's a lot of resilience to going from our bad state back to our good state. Inversely, however, if we're in a good state and we're able to get that to be quite resilient, that could be a very strong way to actually keep these systems where we want them to be and let them be resilient to the impacts of CSOs. This is what we set out to explore. Next slide. In Rotterdam is our case study. It's a city in the Netherlands for those that don't know it. It's a harbor city, so it's quite sprawling, I would say, in terms of the area that falls under the municipality, and it has a lot of water. Next slide. Besides a lot of water that is being managed through pumping stations, so it's a very controlled water system, there's also a lot of sewage and a lot of sewers. To be exact, there are over 500 sewage overflows in Rotterdam. So you can imagine there's a lot to do there in terms of sewage overflow. Of those sewage overflows, it's good to realize that most of them are actually not monitored. Only about 50 or so are monitors for which we were able to get data. Next slide, please. So our goal here was to test the resilience of the water system to increasing sewage overflows given future increases in extreme precipitation. So we know it's going to rain harder, that's going to lead to more overflows. And we were interested to quantify these impacts on water quality, and specifically the ecological water quality, and also quantify these impacts on water quality for people using a modeling approach. Next slide. So we did that using a model train, as we like to call it. So we start with a physical lake model that we feed with all sorts of basic lake characteristics, nutrient loads, water balances, etc., and a bit of climate and meteorological data. Then we use some of these outputs to run our ecological model that you can see in the next slide. Which is PC Lake Plus. It's an ecosystem model that includes a lot of the groups you also saw in these feedback diagrams, but most importantly in this context, it includes submerged plants, which are very important for the ecosystem functioning, but also algae, phytoplankton, and together they compete for nutrients and for light. And then there's all sorts of other groups in there that are relevant to capture the full complexity of such an aquatic ecosystem in a simplified way, of course, because it's still a model. Next slide, please. We coupled that ecosystem model to an ecosystem service module that we developed. And there we try to link directly to these PC Lake Plus outcomes. So the things that the model could provide should be able to be linked if we want to quantify ecosystems. And there we use thresholds based on the suitability thresholds based on socially acceptable norms and regulations, generally speaking. So for instance, for swimming water safety or drinking water safety, we looked at World Health Organization guidelines about toxicities. We looked into the Water Framework Directive to look at the amount of habitat and suitability of habitats, things like that. Next slide, please. Now, we also needed to know something about precipitation and CSO events, so we made a model based on the available data for Rotterdam, which is essentially just a fairly simple regression model. I just plotted it in one-dimensional space, but it's actually multi-dimensional, so it looks real bad here. It's slightly less bad, but the only thing it does is tell us with a certain amount of rainfall, both short-term, within an hour, but also longer-term, up to 7 days, how many CSO events can we expect? So what's our risk of CSO? Next slide, please. We then ran our ecological model to create this sort of resilience graph where we see that as we increase the nutrient loading, initially we get more and more plant growth. At some point, the plant growth goes down and it crashes at around 4.8 milligrams of P per square meter per day, and then we're in a turbid state. Oh, can you go back a slide? Thanks. If we then need to go back, it's a much longer way back, and we end up at around 2 milligrams of phosphorus per square meter per day. To be positive, we decided let's put our starting condition for this given Rotterdam urban water just before that switch point towards a turbid state, so we're always in a clear state, we're always vegetated, and then we started running some simulations with this. So is that the true situation of the urban water system of Rotterdam? Not at all. Like most of the Netherlands, also the urban water system of Rotterdam is not in the best of ecological states. So in some cases this may be true, but in many other cases we're more in a turbid situation. Next slide, please. Now what we did here, we started simulating different amounts of CSO events, and what we see quite clearly is that if we get more and more CSO events over a period of 10 years, eventually, initially we're in a vegetated state, but very quickly with increasing CSOs, we see that we get less and less vegetation biomass and more algal biomass. In practice, this will vary a lot depending on the CSO location we look at, because some of the CSOs are actually more on the right hand of this picture or even beyond that. Some CSOs only overflowed 2 to 3 times in the past 10 years. So it's very variable depending on where they're positioned in the system. But this does give you a nice look of that. With increasing CSO events, we're definitely in trouble. Next slide, please. And when we then looked at different ecosystem services, don't worry, you don't need to look in detail at all of these. What we see actually is that with a little bit of CSOs, we don't necessarily immediately lose all our ecosystem services. So the lower they are, the worse. But what we definitely see is that as CSO frequency goes up, we almost always get into a worse situation than what we started off in terms of the service provisioning. Next slide, please. And that actually makes sense if you think about it, because what's happening in practice is that we're adding a lot of nutrients, so we're going over that hump where we still have a nice, clear vegetated state, and we end up in that turbid situation. And in the end, that is detrimental to a lot of these ecosystem services that can be provided. Next slide, please. We can also try mapping some of this to look more into risk assessment and think about the ecological vulnerability of these CSOs, but potentially also, next slide, looking more at the swimming surface vulnerabilities, for instance, where if we have CSOs that are more likely to overflow, they're also more likely to lead to loss of ecosystem services. Next slide. We can think of all sorts of adaptation strategies in the context of resilience thinking, such as keep trying to push the ball back, so we keep the system in the state it's in. That's going to take continual effort. So ideally, we would really like to get to a situation where we're actually in a good state, and that's more that transformative adaptation. Because if we're in a good state that's very stable, the chance of one of these CSO events happening becomes less of an issue for the ecosystem. Nonetheless, we should also focus on the technological side, where we try and up the resilience of that sewage system to actually leading to a CSO, and that's where the nature-based solutions could come in. Last slide, hopefully. So what we see here is that we currently have, if we do nothing, we stick with it poor water quality in Rotterdam, we're probably going to lose a lot of ecosystem services. And as we move up towards increasing effort and increasing impact, we might actually get to good water quality, end up in that clear, stable state, and hopefully therefore also safeguard our ecosystem services for the future. And that was what I had to share with you.
Thank you very much, Sven. Very interesting talk, which probably will also lead to a lot of questions afterwards. I see some clapping hands. I like that. So now we have 10 minutes to go through some questions that already came up. And I'm looking a bit in direction to Ida, who is monitoring our questions. Maybe you can say a few or raise some questions that came up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ulf. So we have 2 questions in the chat, in the Q&A function right now. And there's also, again, an invitation for everybody else to post your questions here. If it does not work for you, you're also welcome to raise your hand, and then you can open your mic when we call on you. But for the questions that came in, we'll start with the keynote speaker, Kati, at the beginning. There is a question from Benjamin Kupilas from Ecological Institute. I'd be interested to hear whether you experienced citizens or neighbors or other stakeholders removing, for example, debris that provide important habitats, but might pose a risk to infrastructure during high flow. How is this perceived or discussed within your case? Kati, if you could answer to that question, please.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, we did also the kind of interviews and analysis, but not for diverse set of stakeholders, only for practitioners who are responsible for managing, or the urban planners who are responsible of designing aquatic nature-based solutions. Those sites were located in public spaces. So that what you raised is very critical. And if I can just share one slide to show that what you pointed out is something that were strongly discussed with our set of stakeholders, because if you see here, there's a very different examples of aquatic nature-based solutions, and on right-hand side, bioswale on the street level is something that sometimes the all ecological vegetation matter or litter or everything were really considered as a problem, and they wanted to clean them up, and biodiversity issues were not really even discussed or considered to be very important on these sites. Either in the left-hand side, you see more natural like of nature-based solutions, and there it is very critical what you do. And there the biodiversity values are high, so you can really destroy these habitat types of doing too intensive management practices. So I would say that it's very much depend on the sites where we want to see more biodiversity friendly management types, but it can be a trade-off, as you say. Just to highlight with another one that at least here in Finland, these aquatic nature-based solutions are usually very hybrid type of and there's a lot of technological innovative as well, and they become very critical in terms of having too much organic matter there. So definitely it's something that is sometimes in conflict.
Thank you, Katie. Then we can actually move on with a question that also came up for Pablo from Sven. If I understand the question correctly, it was about the integration of the SETS approach. So is it about, do we first make maps for social, ecological, and technical challenges and then integrate, or do we try to bridge the gap between the disciplines immediately with the risk of not moving forward at the rate needed for these issues at hand? Pablo, do you have, maybe also from your practical experiences, do you have any answers to this complex question?
Yeah, thank you, Sven, because I think it's a super stimulating, and I don't know if I have the answer for that. I'm way too inexperienced, but from my experience and trajectory and some of the stuff that I've been working on lately, my most sassy response would be maybe the fact that maybe the fear of not moving fast enough and the way that things have been done already until now, by keeping those things more separated, is part of a problem. I'm not saying it's the problem, I'm not saying it's the biggest problem, but I think that a lot of the things that we see and a lot of the reason why things maybe do not work is because they stay isolated until it's too late. And with that in mind, I would say, and also, you know, from adaptation thing and like literature and the field, knowing that there's never going to be like a net zero risk, and we're never going to be like, okay, we're done, and that being done is not going to arrive sooner or later. I would say maybe we do need to integrate things earlier, and it's also iterative. It doesn't mean coming into the room assuming that none of us knows nothing. We all have our backgrounds, but the conversations on how to build, how to integrate those understanding, and while at the same time being aware that each of us have our own subjective and experience and knowledge-based views, I would say that to me sounds kind of groundbreaking. But I'm not inventing the wheel, you know, like participation and epistemological pluralisms have been on the table in many different ways for quite a lot of time. So yeah, that's my take. That paper by Chester that I can actually maybe see if I can paste in the chat the QR code to the references, but it puts it like that, coming from a hardcore, like questioning infrastructural development. It comes in saying like, it's not only that we need to integrate SE and T perspectives, but we also need to integrate alternatives ways of knowing. So there's like a whole other level here of like whose knowledge matters, that from our perspective, because I'm also like, I have an engineering background, I could also say that makes it extremely inefficient, because how are you going to take all the time to like, are you going to ask every single resident in a city what they think about nature-based solutions? But yeah, there's a lot of things to balance there. So I hope that answers a little bit the question, and happy to chat. You know where to find me.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. I have a last question for Sven. I found it very interesting because you were dealing a lot with the different ecosystem services in cities, and swimming is one of them. And swimming in cities, I mean, it's always somewhat delicate question. Many citizens would like to go swimming, but you also showed us nicely what the different states of aquatic ecosystems that we can potentially find. So, do you see any option to make those different aquatic states visible for the public? Maybe also linking that with swimming in urban waters.
Yeah, I think. Thanks for the question, Ulf. I think it's quite possible to make this somewhat more visible than we do, and I think that's one of the major downsides of working in water. Right, everything is below the water, so no one sees it, so it's not there. And you definitely, if you're living in somewhat of a more polluted situation, I would say, then water tends to be turbid, and you can't see the bottom anyway. But we should really focus more on bringing this message in terms of images to people, because once you start explaining to people this is what good water quality looks like, they start recognizing it. And one of the ways to do that is to really engage themselves in monitoring, like with citizen science, for instance. But an alternative could be to capture the states of water and the way you want states to look in nice illustrations that you can then bring to people and show, or nice pictures. And there are nice examples of that out there. One of my personal hopes would be that in time we would be able to link that more also to model outcomes and so on, so that the model already starts producing images of what these systems could look like given different situations, to make it more of a boundary object for a discussion, rather than just model gives quantitative outcomes and then there's a number and we need to do something because the model said so. No, in the end we do something because we want to make a change.
Okay, thank you, Sven. It was very interesting, and I also see the option maybe to construct digital panels where people see in which state ecosystem is, which is in a way a good opportunity. Then also linking that to maybe our mobile devices offering information services that then can be picked up. So to make those information more tangible, and this at the same time, I think is always a very nice means to put pressure on local politicians to improve the situation. Okay, super. Thank you very much. Now we move on with two more talks, and now we're coming to a colleague of Sven, Lisette de Saint-Napon, and Lisette is a professor at Twente University and also works at Aquatic Ecologist, also at NIA, where she's head of the Aquatic Knowledge Center. Lisette, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ulf, and thanks for introducing me. I'll be talking about co-designing ecosystem service provisioning of nature-based solutions into hydrological aquatic models, and I'll pick up where Sven left it. So next slide, please. So this is the team. It's Sven, Lisette, and Frances Dullemont, who you'll see online as well somewhere. Perhaps she has her camera off. Next slide, please. And we've been working very hard in the past few weeks on getting the modeling started. I'll talk a bit in my talk about the co-design we did in order to get to these ecosystem services, and then I'll give you some preliminary results of the modeling as well. Next slide, please. So, as Sven already explained, Rotterdam is a very sprawled out city. It has a very high level of water management. So the water level is very controlled and the salinity level is very controlled. As some of you may know, our country is for a large chunk below sea level, and that is true for Rotterdam as well. So we always have to manage our water levels. What you see on this slide as well is that Rotterdam is also surrounded by agricultural areas, which also bear consequences for the aquatic ecosystems within the city. Next slide, please. So if you look at the city itself, it is indeed sprawled out. You see the port here to your left, and the port has a lot of consequences for the economic well-being of the city, but also of the economic well-being of the Netherlands as a whole. It's one of the biggest ports in the world, and the city has a lot of impervious substrate. It has the river, the Meuse running through it, but there's some other rivers as well. And importantly, the river Rotte is also determining the aquatic ecosystem here. Next slide, please. So in the beginning of the project, we were keen on co-creating the future of water in Rotterdam, and we were keen on understanding better the stakeholders' perspectives. So we organized a workshop where we try to operationalize the Nature Futures framework of the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and asking people what their perspectives of how they valued nature, the intrinsic value of nature, so nature for nature, the relational value of nature, so nature as culture, and the instrumental value of nature, so more classical ecosystem services approach. And it turns out that next slide, please, that people actually had a high value of the intrinsic value of nature, despite the fact that they were sometimes just working more on the ecosystem services side. Next slide, please. And what we did in these workshops in the beginning of the project, we operationalized Bill Sharp's in 2006, the Ecology and Society paper, the Three Horizon approach, where we looked at three horizons: the business as usual situation, the situation where you have innovative disruptive innovation, so that's the second horizon here, and the horizon where we're interested in transformative change. And just to give you a little bit of a taste of what people were thinking of when they were thinking of transformative change, they were thinking, for instance, on taxation on impervious substrate. They were thinking of that each building has its own water retention basin, and that we would allow for more natural water level and salinity fluctuation. So, for instance, introducing salinity-adapted species. Next slide, please. We also were interested, of course, in the people's perspective on ecosystem services in urban waters. And then what people actually valued most were the human health benefits, the aspects of climate regulation, the aspects of flood regulation, which in a country below sea level, which is the delta of, of four big rivers is of course a key thing, and biodiversity and water quality. Next slide, please. And if you think, this is in Dutch, but I'll walk you a little bit through it. This is the NICHES consortium's perspective on the ecosystem services from urban waters, and their biodiversity and water quality and climate regulation popped off quite frequently. Next slide, please. So if we think about nature-based solutions and sewage overflows in Rotterdam, then we have a situation that a lot of the nature-based solutions are actually concentrated In the center of Rotterdam, there are green roofs and wadis. And to some extent, there are, for instance, green-blue school squares. So that means that the school square itself has some form of greenery, but also a rainwater basin. Next slide, please. We carried out in collaboration with Utrecht University several consultancy projects. So consultancy projects are projects where with high flying students of the Utrecht University where they take a very concise assignment focusing on specific aspects. And we did this in the context of NICHES as well. We had 2 adjacent consultancy projects. And these students, they conducted semi-structured interviews with experts on NBS implementation in the city of Rotterdam. And the consensus was that the knowledge on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions in mitigating CSO events is very limited. And that in installing a separate sewer system as opposed to a combined sewer system was considered more effective in mitigating CSO events. And that one reason for implementing a nature-based solution could be the co-benefits of a nature-based solution as opposed to a technological solution in terms of biodiversity, environmental and human health. Next slide, please. In the second project, they looked at barriers and enablers, and things that were considered barriers were challenging to nature-based solution implementation, were challenging citizen engagement, insufficiency policy development with regard to nature-based solution, competition over urban space. We are a very highly densely populated country, one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And there's actually continuous competition over space. And what we see is that nature is often at the lowest end of that list. But enablers are, for instance, and Sven already mentioned the power of tapping into the power of citizen science, having collaborative governance, and there's a really good example of that in Rotterdam, where you have I'll translate it in English, the Water Power Alliance, which allies 3 different water boards, drinking water companies, as well as the municipality in a joint commitment to climate adaptation of the urban water system. And open experimentation and assessment. Next slide, please. Last year, we had our General Assembly in Barcelona, and Jeroen Langeveld, an urban engineer from the Delft University, gave one of the keynotes. And this is sort of confirming the semi-structured qualitative interviews. He gave a convincing argument that nature-based solution by itself will not solve the combined sewage overflow event situation, at least in the Netherlands. There will be a more. He calculated that having separate sewage overflows will be a more effective solution, but nature-based solutions can buffer to about 5% or so of the water surplus that will be happening under future more extreme climates. So the bulk needs to come from a separate sewage system, but the additional benefits can come from nature-based solutions. So this is what a very likely urban water system will look in 2050, where you do have more greenery, where you do tap in onto the power of the city as a sponge, but you have to have a separate sewage system as well. Next slide, please. So, but what does the modeling tell us on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions? So what we did in Rotterdam, next slide. This is showing the areas with insufficient water storage. So you see that quite a big chunk of the city has insufficient water storage under future climate. So situations of 2050, you have to sort of think of in the back of your mind. Next slide, please. And what we try to do is we try to update the already going on modeling in NICHES. Perhaps Svetlana will say something about that as well, where we use an engineer, the EPA, the American Environmental Agency, tool, bed modeling, we used an engineering tool for local implementation of nature-based solutions. So this is an accounting tool. It's relatively simple in its setup, but what it allows for, it allows you to make engineering choices on a local level. So that's where the advantage of bed modeling comes into mind. Next slide, please. And what we did is we tried to couple this bed modeling tool to our PC Lake Plus modeling tool that Sven already explained in the previous lecture. And this modeling flow, and I'll walk you through the modeling flow in the next slide, will allow us to force PC Lake with bed modeling outcome, which will result in an ecosystem state. And you have to think of parameters like fish biomass, plant biomass, cyanobacteria biomass, the amount of nutrient burial in the sediment, and the water transparency if you think about ecosystem state. Next, please. And this will then give you a certain type of ecosystem services according to the modeling flow that Sven just explained, focusing on water quality, the suitability of urban waters for recreation, habitat provisioning, and nutrient retentioning. Next slide, please. So the modeling workflow that we took is we tried to, by adopting open science workflows, we tried to use as many open science tools as possible. So what we did is we used the Korean land cover maps to have the land use parameters that we needed to force BUT. We looked at the SDAC European soil data for soil characteristics of a city. We looked at OpenStreetMap to get a more precise geolocationing of building and footpaths. And we used hydrosheds and its underlying databases such as hydrolakes and hydrobasins to get rainfall data. And we used these data, next please, to force BED, and where we compared 3 different scenarios: a business as usual scenario and the application of 3 nature-based solutions. And then the nutrient loading outcome of BED, so nutrient loading in terms of phosphorus and nitrogen, would then be the input for, next please, PC Lake, with an additional data from hydrosheds regarding lake depth, sediment type, and lake area. So we did this for the whole area of Rotterdam, which consists about 8 or 9 lake areas. Next, please. And we applied 2 different types of nature-based solutions. One is bioswales, already explained by Kati, and one would be urban wadis. And you see example of those on these slides. Next, please. And what our preliminary results show is that in terms of one of the ecosystem states, so the amount of cyanobacterial biomass, you see that neither the application of a nature-based solution, bioswale or a wadi, is able to shift the situation significantly from a business as usual situation. So you see actually a tendency to have a little bit higher cyanobacterial biomass in when you apply throughout the city a nature-based solution such as bioswale along all the footpaths and streets in the city of Rotterdam, or a wadi along all the houses in the city of Rotterdam. And that has likely to do with both the bioswale and wadis, they capture sediment, and they hence increase the light climate in the water system and in the receiving water system, and that then leads, because we have ample of nutrients in the city of Rotterdam, that then leads to an increased algal biomass, so a biomass of primary producers, including cyanobacteria. Next slide, please. And if we then think about these ecosystem services provisioning, if we model that consequently, and that would be primarily based on the transparency of the water and the cyanobacterial biomass and the amount of macrophytes in the water, then we see that indeed nature-based solutions, nor biospheres nor wadis have a significant difference with regards to the business as usual situation. And before you all get very depressed on this, you have to remember that the city of Rotterdam has hypertrophic waters. So you're looking at a situation which is very locked into the alternative stable state of algal-dominated systems. So, and then it's sort of logical to understand that applying a nature-based solution will do only a little bit in terms of, can only do a little bit in terms of increasing the water quality. Next slide, please. So this is all fresh from the press. So our next steps will be on model validation and quality control. And we set up our workflow such that we can upscale to whole of Europe. And our idea is to, for the whole of Europe, apply this BET PC Lake modeling workflow and see what nature-based solutions can do on a European scale. And with that, I come to the end of my lecture, and I will be happy to take questions, but in the Q&A session. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lisette. Very interesting results, and I'm very confident that we will have also controversial discussions sparking from these results. But before we do so, we move on now to our next and last speaker in the set, which is Svetlana Kromova. She holds a Master of Science in Urban and Regional Planning and a Bachelor in Cartography and GIS, and she has a very strong experiences in environmental systems modeling, and we really profited in NICHES a lot from these experiences and her background, and she's doing her PhD at University Autónoma de Barcelona, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you all for a really kind introduction. Yeah, I'm super excited to present it here. Yeah, basically, like the NICHES project been like the huge part of my PhD, and my PhD thesis now it's like built upon like this NICHES task. And let's jump to the presentation, and the next slide, please. Okay, and the work I'm going to present today is going to focus on like the modeling aspects of the runoff mitigation and additional co-benefits, but more from like the urban scale and on surface perspective, following the nice presentation from Sven and Lisette, which will focus more on like the water bodies. So, and the work I'm going to present, it should be like seen in a smaller package of 4 steps. And I'm going to focus now only for third and the fourth step. So, but basically this work following like the analysis of the risk associated with the stormwater hazards and the visibility assessment for potential integration of the nature-based solution, which is going to present by Johannes later on today for the afternoon session after the lunch. Yeah, please, next slide. Okay. We, as already been said, we have like 5 main case study series, and we did like special explicit analysis of like this package for Rotterdam, Barcelona, and Boston. The next slide, please. But for today's presentation, I'm going to focus and present the work only on the Barcelona. And the next slide. And I'm going to start to do like a bit of recap of analysis we did for site-specific allocation of the nature-based solution. And next slide. So basically, we choose the 5 main types, like more popular types in terms of runoff mitigation in the urban area of nature-based solution, like green roofs, bioswales, urban park, rain gardens, and permeable pavement. And the next slide. And we did like the visibility assessment of the whole urban area to classify each special unit to like visible to from high visibility to no visibility for specific nature-based solution type allocation. We did it from social, ecological, technological perspective, which like been really nicely introduced by Pablo earlier today. And I don't want to focus on this analysis by now because it's going to be presented later on. But in the main detail, so we basically try to do like complex interdisciplinary analysis of like social component, like the administrative suitability, social acceptability, like ecological analysis of like ecosystem characteristic, and technological, like a landscape characteristic of the urban area, like underground structures and like the building construction of the urban area to identify where it's like the higher chance for nature-based solution being implemented and well maintained. And next slide, please. And based on this visibility analysis or assessment, we developed two scenarios together with like scenario 0 or like current land cover. And the first scenario been based on cities' urban greening strategies. In the case of the Barcelona, it's been like the Plan Natura, which basically proposed to integrate 1 square meter of the greenery per resident by 2030, which translates to 160 hectares of the new green spaces. And in the second scenario, we choose for each nature-based solution type the 25 highest visibility score. And you could see like the proportion between the scenario 1 and scenario 2 in amount of the greenery which been introduced to the city. And the next slide, please. And the next step was actually to analyze how this scenario will perform in terms of runoff mitigation. And next slide, please. And we did the modeling. In initial step, we did like the bed modeling, but then we switched to NBS modeling, like the urban flood risk mitigation model, and basically we analyze urban area by the land cover and curve number associated with the different scenarios. And we assess few rain events with a different return period, which have been classified for area of the Barcelona city. And yeah, and the interesting thing, we assess here two parameters. It's like the runoff retention volume, so basically how much water infiltrates into the ground. And the flood volume, it's like amount of the water which stays on the surface, which potentially could cause like the pluvial flood in a city, as well as the overflow of the sewer system, as like this water enters like the pipe and could cause the problem here. And the interesting thing here, we see that there is like really limited capacity for flood volume mitigation, as you could see for different scenarios with the integration of the nature-based solution. So in the next slide, please. So yeah, if we analyze it in a percentage equivalent, we will see that there is, again, we're going back to the point which already been said by Lisette, that nature-based solution, they have like a really limited capacity in the runoff mitigation. So in the case of our modeling, the highest performance of the nature-based solution being a bit more than 10% of the runoff mitigation, which is like, sometimes it's like not really well vocalized in like the urban planning strategy. And the next slide, please. But what does it mean like specially? So I have a background in the GIS and cartography, so I really like to do maps. So if we see how this integration of nature-based solution will influence the runoff retention volume from scenario 0 to scenario 1 and 2, you could see like the highest mitigation for scenario 2. And the next slide, please. And it's associated like really closely with the area of integration of the nature-based solution, like a rain garden, which have like the highest Gard number and which like infiltrate the most of the rainwater. And here we did assessment on the distribution of the runoff on surface. So like it's simple estimation, but we did not consider the movement of the water in a sewer system. So yeah, there's like some limitation of the work here. And the next slide, please. And we also assess how this integration of the nature-based solution will influence the risk. As already mentioned, like the first step was like to do a risk assessment based on IPCC 2012 perspective, where risk made out of like the vulnerability, exposure, and the hazard. So it's going to be again explained by Johannes later on. And yeah, and again, we see like the reduction of the risk associated with the area with the highest implementation of the nature-based solution. And here we have like a really good improvement in overall risk score up to like 47%. And the next slide, please. Next slide. And another step. Now we have okay, we know how much runoff could potentially nature-based solution mitigate, and there's like the clear message that the limitation of the runoff is quite limited, but there is the huge component of provisioning of the co-benefits. And please, next slide. And we did like the several modeling to see how the scenario developed for the runoff mitigation will influence some other hazards and urban issues, which like more relevant for case study. In the case of the Barcelona, like the heat waves event, it's like really critical. And based on the modeling we did, we saw that there is like the improvement of the daytime temperature from 1 to 4 p.m. On historic heat wave happened in the metropolitan area of the Barcelona. And the scenario indicate like the really good performance here in this case. And the next slide, please. And the next slide. And as well, there is the big issue in the Barcelona area with the droughts. And we also assess how nature-based solution will perform in terms of the aquifer recharge. So basically, there is, in the case of the drought in Barcelona, there is the limitation for the irrigation, which could be critical for nature-based solution integration and the green area in the city. So we also assess that the nature-based solution could influence the recharge of the aquifer with potential to use this water for the irrigation. And we also see like the really good improvement with the second scenario here. And yeah, let's next slide. And another thing for really relevant issue for compact cities, like a lot of European, American, and cities worldwide, it's like a nature access. And here we also did analysis and modeling on how the integration of the nature-based solution will influence access to green area for the nature-based solution, following the per capita demand for urban nature, which recommended by the World Health Organization. And again, we see like the really good result for the second scenario. And the next slide, please. And another thing also connected to the presentation of Sven and Lisette, it's the water quality. As like situation with the high nitrogen and phosphorus, it's an issue for many urban areas, including the Barcelona, and wash-offs by the rain of the surfaces, contaminated surfaces into the water bodies. It's like the relevant issue for Barcelona. And we also did the assessment on how integration of nature-based solution will influence these parameters. And we also see like some improvement here. And please, next slide. And we also assess the habitat provisioning by nature-based solution. So, and again, we see like the bigger impact here for scenario 2. Like with a high amount of the nature-based solution implementation. And the next slide, please. And yeah, there's like all the nice story about how great city could like be with an implementation of the nature-based solution. But really important point to raise here, it's like actually the limited mitigation capacity of the nature-based solution in terms of the runoff reduction, which I already like mentioned several times earlier. As well, following this idea, you should rather see like a nature-based solution as a hybrid solution or like a buffer solution for urban adaptation or stormwater-related hazards here. And another thing, it's like single hazard versus multiple hazard prioritization. And in a reality we have right now with the poly crisis and the multiple hazards, which threatening like the urban environment, I think focus on like a single hazard would be like not the most beneficial strategy for the adaptation. So it's not a think through point here. And also another important issue is like the role of the nature-based solution in systematic changes. So some of the nature-based solution as the permeable pavement is sort of like the type of solution we keep, which keeps like status quo in terms of like land use in urban areas. So we will keep our roads, we will keep our parking lots, but we will make it permeable, which might be also not the best strategy here. So another thing to think and discuss in the future. And the next slide, please. Yeah, so basically would love to stay in touch and you know where to find me, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. What big applause for Svetlana. Yeah, I see some clapping hands. That's nice. Now we have 10 more minutes to answer questions, and please think about questions that you want to ask to Svetlana, but we will start now with a question from Ida to Lisette. Ida asked, on the map with the areas of insufficient water storage, and the question was, what does it mean, insufficient water storage in those maps?
Sufficient means in this context that we're looking at flooding situation. So what they did is modeling with the Royal Meteorological Institute of Weather forecast for the regional climate models. And what insufficient means that you have a flooding situation in these areas. Yeah, so it's a risk of flood risk in terms of storage. I hope that answers your question. I see a thumbs up. I'm hoping it's from you. Should I continue to the other question as well and read it up loud?
There is someone who wants to speak, Henry. Maybe we can put him on the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. It was a question from Svetlana.
Oh, yeah, Svetlana.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because with the climate change, probably it will be more like flooding event and maybe drought period. And I wanted to know if also you have tried to model how all those plants that we will plant in the city will need water, and if we will be able to like water them during this drought period that could be really long, sometime even more in Barcelona with water scarcity. And if maybe you have also tried to model if the groundwater recharge can compensate that, if we are recharging enough to water those plants, because also like compensating the heat effect, the plants don't transpire that much when they don't have sufficient water to transpire. So also they don't compensate that much the heat during the heat wave during those periods, critical ones. So I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a really good point. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know, at some point of like the modeling, you need to stop somewhere because like it's a many ideas of you have, like of the things you want to estimate. Unfortunately, I haven't done any estimation on like potential like demand from the plants we will need for the future. It's like definitely will be like the really cool thing to do, but unfortunately I just did like this estimation of the aquifer recharge with the perspective, okay, this water we'll have for the irrigation, but didn't add like this other component of actually on how water will we need now and how much water we will need in the future with the future droughts.
Yep.
Super. We move on with the questions from Dagmar Haben.
Yeah, just a question to Svetlana, and if I may, just a very short one to Lisette. Thank you both very much for your nice presentation, and also the others. Thank you. It is a super interesting morning. Svetlana, I found this interesting. You said the hybridity of the nature-based solution. So could you just explain exactly what this is? What is the hybridity of an NBS? And if I may, to Lisette, concerning the scenarios, I did a lot of scenario work, and I realized that most of this work was almost never kind of used by the stakeholders. We sometimes did this together with them, and was more the best practice examples that were of interest for stakeholders in the later run of these activities. So do you have experience with that? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm not entirely understand. You said like hybridity. It might be like it's like feasibility I mentioned, because
it was hybrid. Just on your slide. Hybrid, yeah.
Hybrid.
But if not, then we can just jump over this question. But I found it interesting.
Like hybrid. Sorry. Yeah, now I got it. Yeah, it's like going back like to the point which Lisette mentioned, that there is like we should not like consider a nature-based solution as like silver bullet or like one solution which fits like all stormwater related issues in the urban environment. So it's like rather see nature-based solution as like the buffer solution which work in integration with the green infrastructure in a way, which might be like sounds not that pretty, not that sexy in a way, but like unfortunately far, based on the modeling we see like this reality. Yeah,
I fully agree. I fully agree, Svetlana. Thank you.
Okay, I think we move on with the question to Lisette.
Sorry, if Lisette may give a short answer, it would be brilliant.
I'll give a short answer. So your question, I'll repeat it for the audience as well, was regarding the uptake of some of these scenarios. So we are in Rotterdam, we are in a fortunate position that we have a good platform there, the Waterkracht Alliantie, the alliance of people that work on water. But still, it's quite tricky to think about the uptake of such scenarios. And that has to do, that's what we found out due to the consultancy project as well, is that is an amount of siloism between the different governance bodies. And that sort of hampers the uptake of these nature-based solutions at the moment. And I think that's also why one of the transformative changes should be actually a more top-down approach where you say, okay, there will be always blue-green nature compensation in urban planning. And then you also almost force the uptake of nature-based solutions. And just to clarify one thing, so it's not that nature-based solutions in Rotterdam don't do anything for runoff. They do, so they do a lot of water storage capacity, but that doesn't have an effect on ecological water quality.
Yeah, true. In urban systems in particular. Thank you, Lisette.
Okay, I think we move on with questions for Lisette. There was a question from Alejandro. He wants to know more about the urban Wadi. Is it the same as bioretention, rain garden systems, etc., and how they are designed?
Yeah, so this is what is in BET called a gravel wetland, and what it basically is a deepening, an excavation along the side of a building, and we chose the longest side of the building, and we chose the most positive engineering setting, and then it has gravel in it, and then on top of that there is vegetation. So I don't know if that answers your question. And these are usually not super deep excavations, so about 30 to 50 centimeters deep. Yeah, so it's a combination of rain garden and bioretention.
Okay, thank you for answering this question. I think we have two more questions, and I would pose this question to Svetlana. Svetlana, there was a question from Lena, and she asked, based on your interesting NBS feasibility maps, it looked as there were a lot of locations where no NBS are really feasible. Why is that?
Thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, I don't want to answer in a lot of details now. If you have a chance to visit the afternoon after lunch session, I will highly encourage you, because Johannes is going to present actually this really complex feasibility assessment we did. And so basically it means that there is in a current situation, there's even from social, ecological, technological perspective, it's just impossible to integrate nature-based solution because of existing planning, or for example, if there's some land conflicts exist, or there's low social acceptability of the nature-based solutions. So good really different variety of the indicators we use. And yeah, just highly encouraged to visit the after lunch session here.
So when the music ends, that is a sign that we will move on with our panel discussion. I hope you had all the chance to grab a coffee and the line in front of the coffee machine wasn't too long. So we are back now at the International Online Conference for bringing forward nature-based solutions in major cities. And we have thought, when we were designing the conference, actually, it would be nice to have a more vivid format, as vivid as can be in such a virtual setting. And so we are thinking to have a panel discussion now with 3 speakers, and you can already see them lined up here. The setting of the panel discussion is the following. We want to ask questions. What are important points from research that can be used to implement nature-based solutions in cities? So what is really what is the essence of all the talks that we heard in the morning, and how we can bring this into practical management and planning? And we have 3 panel speakers here today. I will start introducing them. Afterwards, we will have the chance to hear a short elevator pitch from 3 of them, and those elevator pitches, the panelists have the chance to choose their own question that they would like to answer. Afterwards, it gives we can give them a few more questions, but you're also really very welcome to ask questions to the panelists, either by using the Q&A function that we have already introduced this morning, or by raising your hand, and we will put you on the speakers. Okay, super. We start by introducing our 3 panel discussion partners here today, and we start with Dagmar Hase, and I'm really happy to have you here today. Dagmar Hase is professor of landscape ecology at Humboldt University. She's also guest scientist at U of Z, the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig, and in her research she focuses on urban ecology, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. She works in a lot of projects. I'm pretty sure you already know her from other projects like Green Search, Enable, Clearinghouse. So all those projects have to do with green-blue infrastructure and integration of biodiversity into urban planning and governance. Please give a warm welcome to Dagmar Hase. Then the next, please, one slide back. Now the presentation crashed. We have to go back. I wasn't done with the presentation. One slide back. Yeah. So we also have here at our panel today Nikolai Freberg. He is a professor at Aarhus University, Department of Ecoscience, heading the Center NBS on nature-based solutions and was previous research director at NIVA in Norway. His expertise lies in freshwater ecology, river restoration, and ecological effects of habitat degradation, contributing to a lot of projects. I know him, for instance, from all the activities around reform, but he also is working in the ongoing STAR BCAS project on NBS at catchment scale. Please give a warm welcome to Nikolai. And then we have also with us here today, Isabel Seifert-Dane. She's research manager at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, NIVA, specializing on environmental economics and water society interactions. Her recent work includes assessing the costs and benefits of stormwater management in urban areas and the challenges and opportunities for using nature-based solutions. She has contributed to projects like SPARE, Space for Resilience, focusing on sustainable urban stormwater management. Also, very warm welcome and applause to Isabel. Now we know our panel, and we move on with the next slides. And we will now ask our first question to Dagmar Hase. Next slide, please. So Dagmar, you've been working now for quite a while, also at Humboldt University. And what are the most overlooked but promising types of adaptation measures of existing urban water infrastructure that mitigate the effect of extreme rain events? Maybe you can give us a short answer to that question.
Yes. So I don't know whether you should
next slide, please. Yeah.
The slide. Yes. Otherwise, I will just look at my slide. But first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join here. And I'm so happy that I see so many great colleagues from all the projects you have mentioned, except the one, the Biodiversity by Natur, which I was running together with this nice team around Kati, our first keynote speaker. But all these projects offer the opportunity to deal with first green infrastructure and afterwards nature-based solutions, which pop up a little later. Based on all these quantitative, also qualitative work, together with a big biodiversity trend study we were running in Germany in the last 4 years, I formulated the first key point as follows. I think green-blue solutions are strong, low cost, and insofar sustainable options to face climate change in cities. What is mainly overlooked is, next to the big, very prominent things, implementation setups, the smaller ones. The smaller ones, I mean, this close to the building space, to the real estate, to the immediate vicinity of buildings, effective seepage, water flow, and ETP production spaces, I'm calling them. So little stripes of green, whatever quality, which could bind an entire blue subsurface surface network without the need, and this is important, without the need of big urban redevelopment, because this is what people hesitating. And these small solutions could explicitly include aspects of plant succession, of evolving habitats, and also evolving nature, which then is a plus for biodiversity. My second issue here is a bit less related to the core topic here we talked about so far. But what I have learned in the last 2 months or 3 months, with all the political disruptions we are seeing worldwide, that this kind of free research we are doing here and this clear, pronounced answers to science questions is in danger. And I share this with US colleagues. One of them, I think, will be later in the discussion with Dave Maddox. But it can be also taken Germany, Austria, wherever, whatever, where we see that this kind of research is in danger to be, that we can run it in this clear, pure way, and that it's supported, financially supported, and also societally supported. And it was a very, very difficult decision for myself, but I decided to invest more time to think about how to approach people that are very skeptical about the green and the blue, and they call it green ideology, to convince them that it's something good and useful for them, even if it will be hard to discuss with this kind of people. Maybe we could take up this point later in the second panel, where more socioeconomic and political issues will be discussed. But it's moving me quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Dagmar, also for your personal insights, and the important points that you have raised will really spark up our discussion later on. So we move on to Nikolai, and next slide, please. And his question, which is at the next slide. Yeah, so Nikolai, what can cities balance? How can they balance the trade-offs and co-benefits between grey infrastructure and nature-based solutions in urban water management to enhance the resilience against climate change impacts? Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me for this great conference and very interesting discussion. So I come from this through very much a biodiversity point of view. This is building on work we did in urban streams in Oslo as part of a biodiversity project called Crosslink. And some of this work is continued in the project that are funded by the Norwegian Research Council called CEBICAS, where also riparian zones is a big thing. And the last small logo I have is from our new center on nature-based solutions, which is covering actually all land use types. But what I've learned from restoration ecology, and what I can see is also being dragged into NBS, even more in NBS, of course, because it's more closely associated with societal challenges, is this predominant focus on form and not on function. I'm a strong believer where space permits that if we can create more ecosystem functioning in our urban spaces, we also have some of these, we can bridge some of these challenges, which relates to stormwater runoff, but also relates to ecosystem services or nature's contribution to people. So by creating more functional NBS, we can increase system resilience. That is, of course, for stressors like flooding, but it's also resilience to temperatures, resilience to invasive species, whatever. This will, in the end, benefit us nature's contribution to people much more than we see now, and what we saw in the previous studies. A lot of these nature-based solutions are not really delivering, maybe. And of course, it will help us on biodiversity, and we have a nature crisis, in my opinion. And what we've been looking at is this wooded riparian zones. I've been looking at the slides earlier today, and I see a lot of the systems we look at are devoid of any trees or any shading. And just run you through this. On the left side on my slide is the largest stream in Copenhagen. It's under the cars. It hasn't been open for 100 years. It's there. When we then start saying, oh yeah, we need to have the water to the surface because it's easier to tackle water issues when we can see it, we start off with concrete where there might be a bit of grass in between. And then the next is what we see quite a lot for the NBS is then we create with a lot of plants. Plants is important. They take a lot of stuff up. We don't have soft barriers. We have very hard barriers because it also needs to be contained within the cityscape. Good reasons for it, but it's very, very engineered. And this is not always necessary. And if it's not necessary, we should try and restore another urban stream like the one above with a riparian zone. The reason for this is that riparian zones wooded, and in most of the systems we're working at, there would have been trees along these small streams and ponds. They contribute quite a lot to the ecosystem and the functioning of the ecosystem, and we track this using biochemical markers, so fatty acids and stable isotopes. We already heard about stable isotopes. To track water, we track the carbon from the riparian zone. In addition, these also have the ability to dampen any temperature and create habitats by themselves. The trees have, and they have a they live for a long time. Interestingly enough, so this is the link directly with your carbon from the riparian zone, but furthermore, because you reduce temperature and you increase shading, then you would also get predominance of other algae than green algae or cyanobacteria, as we've seen. You get diatoms in, and diatoms are actually very good in synthesizing omega-3, which is great for us. We might not eat anything from an urban stream, but it's great for the birds and the spiders and whatever. So we should think more along all these things we know from ecology that we can implement whenever possible within the urban landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. This was very interesting and sharing your ideas and showing us how we can learn from aquatic ecology and also how important riparian zones are. And we should really take this into consideration when designing urban waterscapes. Now we move on to the next panelist, which is Isabel Seifert-Dehn. Next slide, please. And also here we start with our elevator pitch, and Isabel decided on the first one that was a question: what are the most overlooked but promising types of adaptation measures? Isabel.
Thanks.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, here it is. I think my main message is that there is probably no one solution which is overlooked, but there is also not one solution which fits in a way all problems. So even though when you only look at stormwater, there will not be like one stormwater solution which you should use. And I think also that we have to be more proactive in thinking how the gray infrastructure we have can be combined with nature-based solutions. I heard not so long ago a talk of someone who said, oh yeah, we were supposed to plan in a way stormwater solutions in an area with a lot of sandy ground. So he thought in the beginning, this would be an infiltration solution we are going for. But then they observed that in a way after rainfall, all water from the neighboring properties was in fact going to this area, and there wouldn't be like enough infiltration capacity, even though it was a sandy ground in a way. So he said, okay, here we had to go for a combined nature-based solution and gray solution, and we had to carefully observe what we could also see in a way in reality. And I think this is often the case. It's not that the NBS is not working, but maybe the NBS does not fit exactly to the place where it is. So I think we should very much go for local site assessments to find in a way the good solutions. And as I said before, the gray and also the green solutions have to play their role. But I am also very in favor to what Dagmar said before. We have a lot of like small areas in the city which are not used. Let's say in Oslo, for example, they narrowed in some roads to make it easier for the people to cross the roads. And at each of these projects, you see in a way that there is now an empty space, but I've never seen that this space was used like proactively to create some more nature. This is really a pity. I have also a message which in a way Nikolai maybe addressed already a bit. I see often that the people are very enthusiastic about doing new things, but in the same time, they often forget that protection is probably the most cost effective. So instead of like daylighting streams which were like buried down in pipes, as the Copenhagen example, we have to also take care that they are not still new streams covered into pipes in a way. And this, at least in Norway, is happening. And my last message, this is more related in a way to stormwater, is when we think in a way stormwater or heavy rainfall, large amounts of water running off, we have to think about this connectivity issue, which is also an issue for the streams, and that we often like the water crosses private and public properties, and we have in a way to convince both the public and the private owners how important it is to have in a way a nature-based solution or a solution which is connected so it can work. And this is some research which we are going to look into the future. Also, how can we convince in a way private people to also contribute to allow the water in a way flowing over their property and in a continuous system, so it can then safely enter into a water body. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Also, a big applause to her. I think you summarized this already quite nicely, and it leads us to our next question that I have to Dagmar. I mean, I heard this now a lot of times. NBS is not a silver bullet solution, and we shouldn't treat it as such. And we heard also that from a lot of the talks today that there are limitations to what NBS can really provide. And since you dedicated so much research also on communicating nature-based solutions, how can we critically access and communicate the actual capacities and limitations of NBS without fueling criticism among some political actors?
Yes. So thank you, first of all for this question. And I think it was already, or it is a big success to celebrate NBS for many things it can do. In the beginning, I was a bit skeptical about NBS because of this hybrid character and also of implementing nature instead of let nature evolve, let nature grow. But I realized, I learned that in urban environments and having these social, ecological, technological systems, we have to deal with this hybrid character, if I may use this word again. But I think on the other hand, we have maybe setting this focus has also some drawbacks, some trade-offs, and I want to list 3 of them. The first is we really should think about urban nature, not only in the way of NBS, of implementing of a human dominance of nature. Of course, cities are not wilderness, and they will never be wilderness. This is clear. And we also learned that we have some problems in terms of when humans and nature come too close, wild nature, right? I just was thinking about spillovers and all this stuff. On the other hand, there are clear signs that evolving nature and nature-based solutions done by nature adapting to climate change are very effective, making a system very resilient. So we should say clearly the limitation of a human implementation, which is limited in complexity to my mind, at least from period to period or at the beginning or somehow when it's managed. Then we should be clear about the limitations. But my most important point is another one here. My most important point is we deal with adaptation a lot. And sometimes I read here also the word mitigation, right? But this community we are in here is a bit separated from the community that is dealing with the actual causes of these needs to adapt. So what I'm always calling the real mitigation. And I think this would be an important point for us, green-blue researcher, to link with this community a bit more. Otherwise, we might fail. I do not say we do, but we might fail in addressing the full picture. And in trying to adapt and trying to bring in blue and green and to buffer some of these effects, having maybe or bringing to certain groups of people the idea, well, this is all negotiable, this is all adaptable, this is all doable, which I really doubt. So this would be my important message, not, let's say, ignoring or not forgetting about the other parts of climate mitigation, which is super important. Not by doing this because there are other experts, but by better linking this to other projects. Yeah, maybe, well, so far to this point. There are many more. I put another issue about hybridization of species in the chat, but this is maybe of less importance here now. Yeah, so let's thank you very much. Let's open up this question also to the other panelists, Nikolai and Isabel. What is your view on this question?
I can start off. First of all, a great response by Dagmar to that question. That is not an easy one. I think that we have a real issue about the win-win situation that is often seen from NBS and is often sold as being something that is cheap and doesn't really cost you a lot and give you some nature and can solve everything. So my disclaimer when I talk about nature-based solutions is always, if we don't do the real mitigation, as Dagmar just mentioned, if we don't reduce emissions, like the example for Rotterdam, nothing will work there because it's hyper-eutrophic, except if you create new areas which are not impacted, where you create areas within the city where you have low nutrient emissions. That's the only way. So we have to be very, very honest about that. NBS is not going to solve anything if we don't act on other parameters or the root causes. The second thing is that about area. So it's a mantra, so everyone says it's very dogmatic. There's not a lot of space in the city. But is that really true? There's been a big major development actually in a natural area outside Copenhagen. And if you go there, it's very central. It's 10 minutes. I'm in central Copenhagen, 10 minutes away with the metro. But they haven't created, they have the space, but they haven't created any nature or nature-based solutions that would really interact with the existing parts of nature, or is very wild at all. It's very managed, it's very landscape. There's quite a lot of space there actually. And I think it was also mentioned earlier, there are these areas in the city, especially when they are where you can do more, but the willingness is not really there. It's almost like we want to put too much into every NBS. They have this multifunctionality is great, but it can be too much, and then it ends up being mediocre on all things we try to achieve. And we need more space. And I think cities need to give away space for nature, as well as the forestry, as well as the agriculture needs to give away space for nature if we want to curb the nature crisis. So that's my relationship to it.
Thank you, Nikolai.
I can just shortly add the good news for Dagmar. We work a lot with the Norwegian municipalities, and as most of the NBS, the urban NBS we construct in Norway, they are not pure NBS. They are in a way constructed nature. So you have some constructed engineered elements, and they require now that the people who deliver, the entrepreneurs, this kind of solutions, that they also take into account what are the CO2 emissions when you install this kind of NBS. Because, yeah, we want in a way to solve something and not make it worse by implementing a kind of solution. So I think this is really great that they request in a way this. And now I forgot what I else wanted to say. Yes, I think concerning stormwater, I think we have to be very honest that a rain garden is not solving 100 years rain event. So that the people, we have to convince them of the benefits that solutions bring, but also be realistic what they really can bring. And what I think is quite interesting in this context is, for example, when you compare the approach Copenhagen has chosen to solve the stormwater issues and Oslo has chosen. So it's a bit like that Copenhagen, due to this extreme rain they had in 2011, they were about, okay, first we have to solve in a way the security issues. So we have to build in a way floodways to get rid of the 100 years rain, let's say. While Oslo was taking more the approach from, okay, we have a lot of damages and combined sewer overflows also by minor rain events, 5 to 20-year rain events maybe. So we want in a way first to cope with those, and then we look at the extreme events. And for the minor events, you can have nature-based solutions like rain gardens, swales, which can help in a way to manage these kind of events.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Good examples, and also good for us to disentangling how the different approaches or the different approach the cities are taking. I just want to move on with a question to you, Isabel, because you've been also working a lot on ecosystem services. So here comes a new question. In your experiences, have there been successful quantifications of the link between biodiversity ecosystem services in urban NBS projects? Maybe you can share some insights on methodologies from these assessments.
I think, in fact, that this was quite a difficult question. And I was trying to find a good example. Eventually, Nikolai has one because I'm not a biologist. But I have the feeling through my projects that people are mainly dealing with a kind of biodiversity proxy. So, for example, they say, okay, this additional area will be converted into whatever habitat. And based on this, they estimate then the temperature regulation or whatever ecosystem service. But they are not really dive down to the level where they look at species or other indicators for biodiversity. And I had really problems in a way to see examples where this is done. The only good example I came about was in a way when you do, for example, river restoration, that you might have some fish species coming back. And if you then have in a way fishermen which are interested in these species, you will direct have the link to the ecosystem service. But I have not good examples for this where you really have a biodiversity metrics and link this strongly to an ecosystem service. I have a bit also experience with the opposite, that the people say after also river reopening projects that these new river corridors are often used by invasive species to spread even more out in the city. And as a lot of invasive species are probably a bit faster in progressing than the natural species. So I'm not sure if the others have good examples where really biodiversity and the ecosystem services are mapped in a proper way together.
Nikolai?
Yeah, I think first of all, we have to realize that there's not a lot of evaluation going on, and a lot from the NBS. There's been good examples today of evaluations, but it's still pretty thin on the ground where you look at the effects for biodiversity, but also ecosystem services in general. So it's so there's a real lack, and that's been identified for the Nordic countries in this report that the Nordic Council of Ministers funded 2 years ago, which showed that there was very little evidence base of the success and the delivery of ecosystem services. And I feel definitely this is also true in the Danish context. It's not that much that are done. And one thing that obviously is really interesting from what Isabel is saying is that we know there is an issue with greenhouse gas emissions, and there's actually just there's a EU project that I was evaluating called Pondful that just ended. And they showed that if you have a clean pond, they store carbon and they emit less greenhouse gases. As soon as you have a polluted pond, which would be an NBS in an urban area, if you're not trying to control the source or at least get rid of some of the nutrients before then it's a great emitter. It emits a lot of greenhouse gases. And with temperature increase, which is out of control, as we all know, in 5, 10, 15 years, these can be major sources of greenhouse gas emissions as one thing, which is really backfiring having water in the landscape if we don't think about sort of the holistic view that we also need to address the water quality issues. And I think we have the tools, and I'm all for these hybrid solutions. I think it's very important that gray meets green. I mean, it is, but as soon as we want to work with the green, we should know that they are a function of ecological processes, which is we can determine quite well, like the influence of temperature. And we should be much more aware on predicting what will happen in due course, what is the likelihood of these providing something for biodiversity or the ecosystem services that we want. And I think we are far from that at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Dagmar, you want to add to this, or?
Yeah, maybe briefly. Maybe first of all, I very much support both arguments by Isabel and by Nikolai, and I really think, and this was also a result of not a biodiversa, but this German project on trends on biodiversity, and I was so happy to chair the urban part of this 3,000 pages book, while we did a vote count of trends in the last 30 to 50 years, and we found next to the loss of species of certain taxa, but also the increase. Bit different according to abundance, effective number of species, so depending on which indicator you take, it is a bit different, but we've also found positive trends, which is on the first view super. On a second, this is a selection that is not done by nature. It is a selection that we are also supporting by nature-based solution. I don't want to say that's wrong, and I don't want to say that's bad. I only want to emphasize that we are doing this. And what Nikolai mentioned, also this drying out of urban systems very fastly. Of course, it is one effect of the technological built component where the base is not the same as you would have an evolved growing ecosystem, where water storage can be much more effective than in any built solution. We cannot escape this, but we have to be aware and to think about when we have longer stable climate conditions, which all the projections meanwhile show that we have long wet conditions, a lot of rain, and then even longer dry conditions. What does it do with our classical knowledge of building nature, building green blue, let green and gray touch? I don't want to say we should not do that, not at all, but we have to be aware of that. And we saw a lot of quite ugly surprises in Leipzig's NBS when having 3-4 months without rain. So, and this is also difficult then for people to convince them, and even more difficult for nature to cope with that. I want to close with one sentence that we have nice quantifications done, quite simple scenarios showing that gardening, for instance, is not only good for multiple ecosystem servers and insects, but that gardening can be a nice interim use, for instance, when cities are stagnating or shrinking in population. No redevelopment of entire areas, which is very convincing for urban planners that they don't need to change a lot, but you can establish part-time gardening, and this is very effective and quantitative. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think now we slightly can move more to this part where also the participants can come in, and I just opened now the Q&A function here and looked at what comments we have so far, and there's a lot of discussion going on also about the first part of my question, to also communicating nature-based solutions. I want to pick up here one comment from Lisette on the human-centric approach, thinking about NBS. So she writes, I do think, however, that capitalizing more on the human mental health aspect would be beneficial for communication. How do you see this? Is that's the way forward to really emphasis on this human health kind of effect?
Yeah, I think what I've learned, not from work I've done myself, sadly, but from the work I've looked into, is that it's a surprisingly strong effect on human mental health to have nature and nature-based solutions in cities. And we talk about invasive species, or some even talk about, which is also, of course, a nature contribution to people, like you get more vectors of disease. But actually, that's probably completely dwarfed by the positive benefits of citizens' ability to have nature, and for the mental health issues, which is being looked at an ongoing project. And I think it has a huge potential because we have a mental health crisis in Europe. I think we can be fair to say as well. It's something that we need to deal with. And I think if we go more into this, so I strongly support this, if we use this as a service that is given, I mean, mental health, it would come out quite strongly, I'm sure. There's all the initial evidence sort of indicates that this could be a big win, actually, for having more nature in whatever form or format.
Dagmar, you're nodding. Any additions to that?
Yeah, just very short. Again, I fully support Nikolai's argument, and I know from Berlin that we already have now doctoral prescriptions for half an hour being in nature or 1 hour being in nature, and this should be effective as long as it was reported by my Charité. This is the big Berlin hospital, Charité colleagues, that it is effective much more than pills. So this a big yes. And I also think, even if I'm critical about this long-term effects of having too less nature and too much built and gray together, but we have to make use of it also, maybe the roof level and the intermediate levels. Even if you think that our cities that are not European, that have a lot of these different heights, how can we make use of this, providing space for people where they can meet nature? I'm not sure how this is in the 10th level on the rooftop to meet blue and green, but I would do it if needed, just to get more access to nature, and this could be also more explored, not only for humans, maybe also for the health of bees and other nice companions. Thank you.
Okay. I would move on a bit with the discussion, and Ida raised a very important point. It was on something that you, Nikolai, said. You mentioned that there might be more space actually for NBS in the city than we think, and we know implementing NBS, it's one of the hindering aspects is very often availability of ground. There's right now, for instance, in Germany, a big infrastructure investment initiative going on. There will be enough money, so to say, in the future. But one of the main hindering points is always availability of land, especially since the focus is so much on public land. So, Nikolai, where do you see land for extensive nature-based solutions? Is it like industrial areas, business parks, or suburbs? What are you had in mind when saying that?
Yeah, one example that springs to mind, which is very relevant in a Danish context, is harbor areas, where you actually degraded originally with the coastline quite substantially when you sailed everywhere, as we did in Denmark in the old days. And now, instead of creating nature, we are building these flats that can be sold for 15 million Danish crowns each. And I think we have to stop up and saying we're very concerned about the landscape that is not degraded, but we built big housing estates for the rich. So they move from their houses in the country that is then left for. I mean, there's so much. So it is industrial. It's often industrial. It's often where there's been changes. A lot of the industrial areas have been abandoned in this country as well, and it is mainly used to really put up very expensive housing with very little room for nature, and there could be much more done in the seascape for NBS in all these harbor areas, I think, and of course river areas, river cities like it's common in Germany. These are areas where at least you should have the discussion of how to bring in more nature, and it doesn't all need to be above water. It's been done in Oslo as well. There was quite a bit of initiative around doing something for nature when you put in new housing. So it's in particular these areas where you move from one use and then want to have a residential area often. I think that's important. And I also like what Dagmar was saying about gardens. I mean, all Danes wanted their own house with a big garden where they have rhododendron and sprayed with Roundup, so there was absolutely no weeds growing. This is an enormous potential for more nature in these areas. So I think it actually exists, but we also need to realize that there needs to be a biodiversity plan for these urban areas. And I'm sort of consulting the Copenhagen municipality at the moment and their biodiversity plan. And this is because they feel that it's someone else that are working on sewage issue. It's another institute or part of the state that works on delivering water, taking away sewage and whatever. And they often decide how the landscape is going to be modified. And it's not necessarily looking at biodiversity. And this is why I'm saying sometimes there's actually probably more area than we believe if the planning phase started off with looking into more NBS. I think actually where Oslo is a good example, as Isabel was saying. I think there's been quite a lot done on the surface water NBS for both flood protection, but also to get areas that are more natural-like and link them up with existing river systems through Oslo. So it can be done, I'm sure.
Can I add on this?
Yeah, please.
I think especially this garden aspect. I mean, most gardens are private grounds, and it's not about only having a garden, it's also what you do or not do in your garden in a way. So I think this aspect that you can also take into account in a way private gardens for managing biodiversity or stormwater is not considered yet so much because it creates more work effort. You have in a way to convince the people, you have to teach them, to tell them in a way what is good or bad for certain species. And I think at least from Norway, I know that a lot of municipalities are a bit hesitant to go this way because they don't have the personnel to say it like this. But I think it's promising because a lot of people do not know. I mean, in this webinar, probably all people have a relative high knowledge on these issues, but the normal people you meet outside, they have no clue about stormwater management and also not about biodiversity conservation. But they are not against it when you in a way explain why it's good, and there is a way to convince them and make use in a way to a certain extent also of private gardens.
Dagmar, you want to add maybe also some examples from Berlin?
Yes, I can say that I can only support this, and I think Germany is comparatively strict, at least some cities, because they are autonomous communes, so there's not a state prescription possible, but they just forbid now these kind of asphalt and totally gray gardens, and I think there are plans to intervene a bit more, not intervene in the strong sense, but just as given incentives. I was last week at a seminar of the pesticide-free communes, and there were a lot of participants, over 400 in such a webinar, from urban planning, from communities, municipalities, really cool people. And they were so interested, and they know a lot what is possible, what to do also in terms of gardens. And they have a good link to, let's say, the garden owners. Insofar, a big yes for gardens, but I wanted to emphasize also using an examples from Berlin, there is also the potential of cemeteries. Cemeteries are super important because they also undergo a big change. So you know that the classical kind of grave type is not so prominent anymore. People look more for natural or collective solutions. So there is space. What Nikolai just said, the word space. Yes, there is space. And often this is either church land or land that is still comparatively inside cities, so not at the periphery. And cemeteries are interested to transform their space, either a green classroom or even temporary gardens. The Princess Gardens in Berlin moved now to cemetery. Of course, this is for some people a step to go for leisure to the cemetery area. However, if you pull down the walls and if you make it accessible like a park, there are super opportunities. And there is already a kind of intrinsic biodiversity due to this function as a cemetery. And we could build on this. And this is comparatively straightforward. So my plea is here, next to brownfields, which I love, and gardens, cemeteries.
Okay, we need more NBS on cemeteries. And I can only add to that, all the NBS that collect water could be a good source also for irrigating these old trees, which are super also sensible to the heat wave that we are seeing in cities. Now, there's a completely new question coming up from the panel, from the audience. It's about the nature restoration regulation. You're probably familiar with. And I mean, obviously, everyone asks themselves, what does it mean for me as a city, for me as a Bundesland? But the question is, I mean, what can we take from this nature restoration regulation? What is positive when it comes to implementing NBS in cityscapes?
Maybe, Ulf, I would just start because we actually, we started in my group to collect information from urban planners, from experts, from also non-governmental organizations like NABU, big ones in Germany, but also investors in space, so building companies. What does this law mean for you? Using the example, for instance, for Berlin, we ask cities where do you see a potential? Where do you see a chance? And also providing a big map. And what areas do you think could be more supported than before? For instance, big brownfields. I don't know whether you know the Tempelhof field. This is a big former airfield in Berlin, and a lot of discussions about what to do there, from new big housing areas via public libraries and blah, 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 to completely free nature areas and so on. I think this law gives us better ground to make longer term decisions. Yeah, and also to support maybe areas, I think Nikolai mentioned brownfields, where we don't have a real opinion about what to do, but there is a lot of successive nature actually. To make a long story short, I think there is a big opportunity, but there's also a big opportunity to have many words and to fail. Insofar, we should try to systematically explore which types of areas and spaces within the urban can be effectively supported by this new law, and to support planners who often have no time for such explorations to run into that. This would be my first approach here.
Thank you. Any additions?
I have one point in this. It's also from a Norwegian perspective, but I think it's also very important to tell the people that they also need like good data in a way. I mean, the Tempelhof field is a new space, but I'm thinking also that you should, as a municipality, map out the areas, for example, where you have good biodiversity, and then think a bit strategically, okay, should I maybe have close by other areas to make a connection to a third area or something like this? And I think I know from Norway that this is often done on a very superficial level, that they use, for example, satellite maps. And there have been cases in the media now which showed that the municipalities only relied on these superficial assessments and then really, built down nature or built something on areas where they should not have built because there were like rare species, for example. So this, that you go out in the field, that you bring a biologist who maps out what is there, this is very important. But I think a lot of, especially smaller municipalities, maybe do not have this expertise in-house and do also not have the money to send people out. So I think, but you have to make them aware in the first hand, and not sure about the regulations in Germany anymore, but maybe to have any kind of support from a national system to do this kind of mapping, something like this, that we do not lose like more nature in a way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can only agree with the last point. We have to stop degradation of the few spots of existing nature we have left. That's really important. And it's really important to map them out as well. We're also doing this as another project where we try and link the NBS solutions to biodiversity hotspots in the landscape. But also within, I mean, a lot of our big cities lies in areas that were naturally quite rich in diversity, because this is why we settled there in the first, and like along large rivers, which had these ecotone, and there's a lot of species there. So what I think specifically that the restoration law can do is it can help us argue for upscaling. And we know that's limited upscaling within the urban area itself. But if you look into creating linkages to peri-urban areas, to sort of, again, having this more holistic view, I think the restoration law is quite ideally suited for sort of taking this a step further than we've managed until now. So I think if we can think maybe also across the urban, non-urban area a little more in future, and also realize what was the biodiversity assets in the urban areas before they really got very urban. And there might still, as Isabel says, there's often remnants somewhere or that habitat type is extremely endangered because the cities is there and there's only a few other sites, and they should then be extremely protected, even though they're outside the city. But it's all linked. This is just a historical issue. So that type of more holistic thinking is hopefully what the restoration law can give us.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, this right now in all the member states, nature restoration regulation is being, right now in a planning phase. So these nature restoration plans need to be developed, and it's very hard actually for those who are in charge on the national level to understand and find the potential areas where NBS can be implemented, where trees can be planted, where these 25,000 kilometer free-flowing rivers can be established. So actually the potential, although we did so much monitoring and planning in the past, is sometimes unclear. So, and I think in terms of timing, right now it's a perfect timing. If you, and also looking into our wider audience, if you have good ideas on where to restore nature, make that public, share that with the relevant authorities, mainly on the federal level here in Germany, in order to get heard. Because right now there's a window of opportunity to feed into this process. I'm just saying there are big question marks concerning the implementation, at least here in Germany, and I'm pretty sure it also is true for some other member states. As we're coming close to our lunch breaks, and I don't want to steal any valuable lunchtime from you guys, last question to finalize this panel here in the morning, which suits quite well to the overall topic of this morning session. It's about NBS, and I mean, we know that NBS need to be designed now climate safe, so to say. So the question is on climate resilient species, for instance, drought resilient trees, but also flood resilient trees, or if you think about microinvertebrates in rivers. Maybe you can say a few words about how important that is. If you design them, if you plant new trees, if you insert new species, is that an important point to consider? Anyone who wants to answer that question?
I can just say a few words on this. It is very important because we have very good climate predictions that can be downscaled now, which I think is good. And we know the range of what will going to happen, and a completely different resolution to 20 years ago, just 10 years ago. But we need the other predictive models from the biology and from the ecosystem service delivery. So there was this pre-restoration concept, which is built on habitat envelope modeling of different species to actually predict, would they be able to live there? There were some birds in Colorado, but would they actually be able to live there in 2050 on if you restored an area, a nesting area for these birds, would they be nesting there? And in some cases they wouldn't, because it would be too hot and too dry from that environment. But that could be taken up as well from NBS. We should try and be able better to predict what is going to happen in future. So I'm strongly advocating that we should go in that direction. And I think it's very important that we select certain species that are actually resisted, but we want as many species to be there. But if we can't do anything about the climate, we need to find habitats that will keep cool even in 50 years. And the same, of course, with the greenhouse gas emission. We don't want to turn these into sources of emission. So we need to do something about, and we can predict this if we want, and we should aim for this.
Yeah, fully support this, Nikolai. And I think we have a big discussion in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe about the right tree species, about the native tree species. We know that that classical prevailing tree species, native ones, are really will lose the fight against the longer droughtness. So we will need to adapt also our eyes, our ideas about what are tree species that are fitting in our cities. Meanwhile, Robinia is so much less dangerous and problematic than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Even the tree of heaven is undergoes a certain acceptance. So these are really issues that have to be printed into the mind of an ecologist. I have to be honest. But I think we have to do so even when we think about birds. Then what does it mean when the tree crowns are de-densifying and dying? I saw so many nests that were falling down, and trees where birds cannot build nests anymore because the de-densification is so much progressed. Insofar, a big yes, we need to think holistic. On the other hand, I'm always pleading for let nature do. If this is supported by invasive species, oh my God, yes, then it is. To a certain extent, maybe we have to be a bit more open to allow this and to see what nature is doing. One last remark, and therefore I raised my hand. We're discussing here all the time about the pluses of green-blue for biodiversity. Please take into your minds and into your consideration that in the new coalition papers at least for the new German government, I heard that the word biodiversity, despite of a previous green minister on environment, is not appearing once. Thank you.
This was very sad. I want to
please
add some positive things on the end.
Good.
I think to Ida's question, I met a practitioner, and I think he had a nice rule about these trees and using endemic or not endemic species. He said, I look at these predictions, which Nikolai mentioned, and then I say, okay, what climate are we going to have in 50 to 100 years in our city? And then I look if I find a city which has this climate today, and I look which trees are growing there. Because I assume that when climate is changing, we would naturally, after a while, getting these tree species to this place we have now. And so I can plant them already now because they will come anyhow. I think this was a very attractive and practical approach to the issue.
Okay, thank you. This was a very nice practical suggestion also for those who are more like working on the practical side of implementing nature-based solutions in cities. I must say this was a very vivid discussion and I enjoyed it a lot. We are now at the end of our morning session, so to say. We will have now 1 hour of lunch break. We will meet again in exactly 1 hour, which is 1:30. Thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you also for all the participants who put in question and been actively contributing to our polls. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And in the afternoon session, I can already say we will even have new audiences because some people just, for instance, sign up for the afternoon session. So stay tuned and I see you back in 1 hour. Ciao. Enjoy your lunch.